Before we begin, a word. Every voice you are about to hear could belong to a real person, and the next one could be yours. Claim a part and read it aloud at footnotes and folly.click. Welcome back. I am Pemberton, and this is Book 17, Part 4, the close of the book, and the end of the house of Herod as a kingdom. While the sons argue in Rome, Judea comes apart. Josephus counts 10,000 disorders of men who were nothing put on the diadem. Judas, the son of the brigand Ezekias in Galilee, Simon, a great handsome slave of Herod's who burned the palaces, and Athronges, a shepherd of enormous strength who crowned himself with his 4 brothers for captains. Into this Varus brings the legions, and the reprisal is Roman, and total Sepphoris burned, the country harried, and 2,000 of the rebels crucified. Then we return to Rome for the verdict. Caesar hears the envoys, confirms the substance of Herod's will, and carves the kingdom among the brothers Archelaus over Judea, Antipas and Philip over the rest, none of them to be called king. We will meet a false Alexander, a dead prince conjured up to cheat the Jews of Rome. And we will see Archelaus, warned by a strange dream of his wife Glaphyra, banished at last to Gaul. Let us finish Book 17.
At the same time Judea was disturbed by 10,000 other disorders, each of them almost like an open revolt. Many men armed themselves, and took on the posture of war, either because they hoped to gain something for themselves, or because they were hostile to the Jews. In particular, 2,000 of Herod's old soldiers, who had already been dismissed from service, gathered inside Judea and fought against the king's troops. Archelaus, Herod's first cousin, opposed them, but their military skill drove him out of the plains and into the hill country. He stayed in the strongholds there and saved whatever he could. There was also Judas, the son of that Zacchaeus who had once been chief of the robbers. Zacchaeus had been a very powerful man, and Herod had captured him only with great difficulty. This Judas gathered around himself a crowd of lawless men near Sepphoris in Galilee. He attacked the palace there and seized all the weapons stored in it. With those weapons he armed everyone who was with him, and he also carried off whatever money had been left there. He became a terror to all men, tearing apart and destroying anyone who came near him. He did all this in order to raise himself up, driven by an ambitious desire for royal power. He hoped to win that dignity, not as the reward of honorable skill in war, but as the result of his extravagant injuries against others. There was also Simon, who had been a slave of Herod the king. In other respects he was an impressive man, handsome, tall, and strongly built. He was far above others of his station, and important matters had been entrusted to him. When he saw the disorder in the country, he was lifted up by it and grew bold enough to put a diadem on his head. A number of the people stood by him, and through them he was declared king. He considered himself more worthy of that dignity than anyone else. He burned down the royal palace at Jericho and plundered what was left in it. He also set fire to many other houses belonging to the king in different parts of the country, destroying them completely, and he allowed his followers to take whatever remained in them as spoil. Simon would have done even greater things if action had not quickly been taken to suppress him. Gratus joined himself with some Roman soldiers, took the forces he had with him, and went out to meet Simon. After a long and severe fight, a large part of the men from Perea, who were an undisciplined body and fought more with boldness than with skill, were destroyed. Simon himself escaped by fleeing through a certain valley, but Gratus overtook him and cut off his head. The royal palace at Amathus, near the river Jordan, was also burned down by a band of men who had gathered in the same way as those who followed Simon. In this way a great and savage fury spread through the nation. There was no king to keep the multitude in order, and the foreigners who came to bring the rebels back to sobriety instead inflamed them further by the injuries they committed and by the greedy way they handled affairs. There was also Athronges. He was not distinguished by noble ancestors, nor by any great wealth, but had in every respect been only a shepherd, unknown to everyone. Yet because he was tall and stronger in his hands than other men, he dared to set himself up as king. He found it so pleasing to commit extraordinary injuries against others that he cared little whether he lost his life, so long as he died in so great an attempt. He also had 4 brothers, all of them tall men, who were believed to be stronger in their hands than others. This encouraged them to aim at great things, for they thought their strength would support them in holding a kingdom. Each of these brothers ruled over his own band of men, and the people who gathered to them were very numerous. Each brother acted as a commander, but when they came to fight, they were subordinate to Athronges and fought on his behalf. He wore a diadem on his head, assembled a council to debate what should be done, and everything was carried out according to his will. Athronges kept his power for a long time. He was called king, and nothing kept him from doing whatever he pleased. He and his brothers killed many of both the Romans and the king's forces, and they acted with the same hatred toward each side. They attacked the king's forces because of the uncontrolled conduct those forces had been allowed under Herod's government, and they attacked the Romans because of the injuries they had recently received from them. As time went on, however, they became cruel to all kinds of men. No one could escape one or another of these rebellions, since they killed some people in hope of gain in others, simply because killing had become their custom. On one occasion they attacked a company of Romans at Emmaus who were bringing grain and weapons to the army. They fell upon Arius, the centurion who commanded the company, and shot 40 of his best foot soldiers. The rest were frightened by the slaughter and left their dead behind, saving themselves with the help of Gratus, who came to their aid with the king's troops that were around him. These 4 brothers carried on the war for a long time by expeditions of this kind and caused the Romans much grief, but they also did great harm to their own nation. In the end they were subdued. One of them fell in a fight with Gratus, another in a fight with Ptolemy. Archelaus took the eldest prisoner. The last brother was so cast down by the misfortunes of the others, and saw so clearly that he had no way left to save himself, since his army had been worn down by sickness and continual labor, that he surrendered himself to Archelaus after Archelaus promised and swore to God that his life would be preserved. These events, however, happened a good while later. By now Judea was full of robberies. Whenever the different bands of rebels found someone to lead them, they immediately made him king so that he might do harm to the public. In a small measure, and in lesser matters, they injured the Romans, but the murders they committed against their own people continued for a long time. As soon as Varus learned the condition of Judea from Sabinus's letter, he became anxious for the legion he had left there. He therefore took the other 2 legions, for Syria had 3 legions in all, along with 4 troops of horsemen and the various auxiliary forces supplied by the kings and by certain tetrarchs. He hurried as quickly as he could to help those who were then under siege in Judea. He ordered everyone sent out for this expedition to make haste to Ptolemais. As he passed through Berytus, the citizens there gave him 1,500 auxiliaries. Aretas, king of Arabia Pitria, because of his hatred for Herod and because he wanted to gain the favor of the Romans, sent him considerable help, including both foot soldiers and horsemen. When Varus had gathered all his forces, he entrusted part of them to his son and to one of his friends and sent them on an expedition into Galilee, which lies near Ptolemais. They attacked the enemy, put them to flight, took Sepphoris, enslaved its inhabitants, and burned the city. Varus himself marched with his whole army towards Samaria. He did not interfere with that city, because it had not joined the rebels at all, but he camped at a certain village belonging to Ptolemy called Arus. The Arabians burned it because of their hatred for Herod and their enmity toward his friends. From there they marched to another village called Sampho, which the Arabians plundered and burned, although it was a fortified and strong place. Along the whole march nothing escaped them. Everywhere was filled with fire and slaughter. Emmaus was also burned by Varus's order after its inhabitants had abandoned it, so that he might avenge those who had been destroyed there. From there he marched to Jerusalem. When the Jews whose camp was there, and who had been besieging the Roman legion, could not bear the approach of this army, they left the siege unfinished. As for the Jews of Jerusalem, when Varus bitterly reproached them for what had happened, they cleared themselves of the accusation. They argued that the crowd had gathered because of the feast, that the war had not been made with their approval but through the rashness of strangers, and that they had been on the Roman side and had been besieged together with them rather than having any desire to besiege them. Joseph, King Herod's cousin german, had already come out to meet Varus, as had Gratus and Rufus, bringing their soldiers with them, together with the Romans who had been besieged. Sabinus, however, did not come into Varus's presence. Instead, he slipped privately out of the city and went down to the seaside. Varus then sent part of his army into the countryside to search for the people who had started the revolt. When they were found, he punished those who were most guilty and released others. The number crucified for this uprising was 2,000. After that, he dismissed the army, because he found it of no use for the business he had come to settle. The soldiers had behaved in a very disorderly way, disobeying Varus's commands and ignoring what he wanted them to do, because they cared more about the profit they could make from the harm they caused. When Varus learned that 10,000 Jews had gathered together, he hurried to seize them. But they did not go so far as to fight him. On the advice of Archelaus, they came together and surrendered to him. Varus forgave the multitude for the crime of rebellion, but he sent their several commanders to Caesar. Caesar dismissed many of them. The only people he punished were Herod's relatives who had taken part in the war, because they had fought against their own family without the slightest concern for justice. After Varus had settled these matters and stationed the former legion at Jerusalem, he returned to Antioch. But Archelaus now faced new troubles at Rome for the following reason. An embassy of the Jews had come to Rome, because Varus had allowed the nation to send one, so that they could petition for the freedom to live under their own laws. The ambassadors officially sent by the nation numbered 50, and more than 8,000 Jews already living at Rome joined them. Caesar then assembled his friends and the leading men among the Romans in the temple of Apollo, which he had built at enormous expense. The ambassadors came there, and the large body of Jews already in Rome came with them. Archelaus and his friends also came. But Archelaus's various kinsmen would not join him because they hated him. At the same time, they thought it would be too blatant to help the ambassadors against him, since they supposed Caesar would regard it as disgraceful for them to act openly against a man of their own family. Philip had also come there from Syria at Varus's urging, chiefly intending to support his brother Archelaus, because Varus was his great friend. Yet Philip also came with another purpose. If any change should be made in the form of government, as Varus suspected might happen, and if some division of authority should be made because so many people wanted the freedom to live by their own laws, Philip did not want to be left out, but hoped to receive his share. When the Jewish ambassadors were given permission to speak, Those who hoped to abolish royal government began by accusing Herod of his wrongs. They said that he had indeed been called a king, but had taken for himself the unchecked power that tyrants exercise over their subjects. He had used that power to destroy the Jews, and he had also introduced many changes among them according to his own desires. Many people had died because of the destruction he brought on them, as many as no other history records. Yet those who survived were even more miserable than those who suffered death under him, not only because they lived in anxiety over his looks and temper toward them, but also because their property was always in danger of being seized by him. They said that Herod never stopped adorning the nearby cities inhabited by foreigners, while the cities belonging to his own government were ruined and utterly destroyed. When he took the kingdom, it had been in an extraordinarily flourishing condition, but he had filled the nation with the greatest poverty. Whenever he killed members of the nobility on unjust pretexts, he took their estates. Whenever he allowed any of them to live, he condemned them to lose what they possessed. Besides the annual taxes he imposed on every one of them, they had to give generous presents to him, to his household servants and friends, and to those of his slaves who had been granted the favor of serving as his tax collectors. There was no way to escape unjust violence except by paying gold or silver. They said they would say nothing about the corruption of their virgins' chastity, the disgrace brought on their wives through accusations of incontinence, and other deeds done insolently and inhumanely, because those who had suffered such things took almost as much comfort in having them concealed as they would have taken in never having suffered them at all. Herod, they said, had inflicted abuses on them that even a wild beast would not have inflicted if it had been given power to rule over them. Although their nation had passed through many upheavals and changes of government, their history recorded no calamity they had ever endured that could compare with the one Herod had brought upon them. For that reason, they said, they had thought they could justly and gladly greet Archelaus as king, assuming that whoever was placed over the kingdom would be milder to them than Herod had been. They had joined Archelaus in mourning for his father in order to please him, and they were ready to oblige him in other matters too, if they could find even a moderate degree of restraint in him. But he seemed afraid that he would not be considered Herod's true son. So, without delay, and before his authority had even been firmly established, he immediately showed the nation what he meant to do, even though the power to dispose of the kingdom still belonged to Caesar, who could either give it to him or refuse it as he pleased. They said Archelaus had given his subjects a sample of his future virtue, and of the moderation and good government they could expect from him, in his very first action concerning them, his own citizens, and God himself, when he slaughtered 3,000 of his own countrymen at the temple. How, then, could they avoid rightly hating him, when to the rest of his barbarity he had added this charge against them, that they had opposed and contradicted him in the exercise of his authority? Their main request was that they be freed from kingship and similar forms of government, attached to Syria, and placed under governors said to rule them. In that way, it would become clear whether they were truly a seditious people, generally fond of change, or whether they would live in an orderly manner if any reasonably moderate governors were set over them. After the Jews had spoken, Nicolaus defended the kings against their charges. He said that, since Herod had never been accused in this way during his lifetime, it was improper for men who might then have accused him of lesser offenses, and might have had him punished while he was alive, to bring charges against him now that he was dead. He also said that Archelaus's actions had been caused by the injuries the Jews had done to him. They wanted to rule contrary to the laws, and they tried to kill the men who would have stopped them from acting unjustly. Then, when Archelaus punished them for what they had done, they complained against him. So Nicolaus accused them of attempting revolution and of taking pleasure in sedition, because they had never learned to submit to justice and the laws, but still wanted to be above everything. This was the substance of what Nicolaus said. When Caesar had heard these arguments, he dismissed the assembly. A few days later, he appointed Archelaus, not as king of the whole country, but as ethnarch over 1/2 of the territory that had been subject to Herod. He promised to give him the royal title later if he governed his share virtuously. As for the other half, Caesar divided it into 2 parts and gave them to 2 other sons of Herod, Philip and Antipas. This was the same Antipas who had disputed with Archelaus over the whole kingdom. Perea and Galilee paid tribute to Antipas, amounting each year to 200 talents. Titania, with Trachonitis and Auranitis, together with a certain part of what was called the house of Zenodorus, paid 100 talents in tribute to Philip. Idumea, Judea, and the country of Samaria paid tribute to Archelaus, but Caesar ordered that a 4th part of their tribute be remitted, granting them this relief because they had not joined the rest of the multitude in the revolt. Certain cities also paid tribute to Archelaus: Stratos Tower, Sebast, Joppa, and Jerusalem. But Gaza, Gadara, and Hippos were Greek cities, and Caesar separated them from Archelaus's government and added them to the province of Syria. The tribute money that came to Archelaus each year from his own dominions amounted to 600 talents. This was what Herod's sons received from their father's inheritance. Salome received what her brother had left her in his will: Jamnia, Ashdod, Phasaelis, and 500,000 drachmae of coined silver. In addition, Caesar gave her a royal residence at Ascalon. Altogether, her yearly revenues came to 60 talents, and her dwelling house lay within the territory governed by Archelaus. The rest of the king's relatives also received what his will assigned to them. Caesar also gave each of Herod's 2 unmarried daughters, in addition to what their father had left them, 250,000 drachmae of silver, and he married them to the sons of Varus. He also granted to the king's sons everything that had been bequeathed to himself, amounting to 1,500 talents, except for a few vessels that he kept for himself. He valued these not so much because they were worth a great deal, but because they were memorials of the king. After Caesar had settled these affairs, a certain young man appeared. He was a Jew by birth, but had been brought up by a Roman freedman in the city of Sidon. Because his face resembled that of Alexander, the son of Herod whom Herod had killed, and because those who saw him testified to that resemblance, he attached himself to Herod's family. This encouraged him to try to obtain the government. He took as his helper a man of his own nation, one who knew the affairs of the palace well, but who was otherwise wicked, naturally capable of causing great public disturbances, and ready to teach the other man such a mischievous scheme. The young man declared that he was Alexander, the son of Herod, and that one of the men sent to kill him had secretly carried him away. According to his story, that man had actually killed other men in order to deceive the spectators, while saving both him and his brother Aristobulus. By this claim the man became bold enough to deceive those who came to him. When he reached Crete, he persuaded all the Jews who came to speak with him that he was Alexander. After he had received much money from them there, he crossed over to Melos. There he obtained still more money than before, because the people believed he belonged to the royal family and hoped that he would recover his father's principality and reward those who had helped him. He then hurried to Rome, escorted by the strangers who had received him. He was also fortunate enough, when he landed at Dicearchia, to bring the Jews there under the same delusion. Not only ordinary people, but also all who had been important under Herod, or had held affection for him, attached themselves to this man as to their king. The reason was that people were glad to accept his claims, and his claims were supported by the likeness of his face. Those who had known Alexander were strongly convinced that this man was the same person, and they confirmed it to others with oaths. So when the report spread that he was coming to Rome, the whole multitude of Jews there went out to meet him. They attributed his unexpected escape to divine providence and rejoiced because of his mother's family. When he arrived, he was carried through the streets in a royal litter. Everything around him was ornamented as kings are adorned, all at the expense of those who entertained him. The multitude crowded around him in great numbers and gave him loud acclamations, and nothing was left undone that seemed fitting for one who had been preserved so unexpectedly. When Caesar was told of this, he did not believe it, because Herod was not easily deceived in matters that deeply concerned him. Still, since he had some suspicion that it might be true, he sent Celadus, one of his freedmen and a man who had known the young men themselves, and ordered him to bring Alexander into his presence. Celadus brought him, though he was no better than the rest of the multitude at judging who he was. Yet the man did not deceive Caesar. Although he resembled Alexander, the likeness was not exact enough to mislead someone with good judgment. This false Alexander had rough hands from the work he had done, and instead of the softness of body that the real Alexander had because of his delicate and noble upbringing, this man, for the opposite reason, had a rugged body. When Caesar saw how the teacher and the pupil agreed in their false story and in their bold way of speaking, he asked about Aristobulus. He asked what had become of the brother who, as they claimed, had been carried away with him, and why Aristobulus had not come with him to recover the dominion that was also due to his noble birth. The man answered that Aristobulus had been left on the island of Crete because of the dangers of the sea. If any accident happened to himself, the posterity of Mariamne would not be entirely destroyed. Aristobulus would survive and punish those who had made such treacherous designs against them. The man persisted in these claims, and the author of the imposture supported him. "If you do not try to deceive me, your reward will be that you will escape with your life. Tell me then who you are, and who had the boldness to devise such a fraud as this. This scheme is too great a piece of villainy to have been undertaken by someone of your age." Since he had no other course left, the young man told Caesar the whole plot, how it had been arranged, and by whom. Caesar observed that the false Alexander was a strong and active man, fit to work with his hands. Therefore, so that he would not break his promise to spare his life, Caesar placed him among the sailors who were to row. But he put to death the man who had induced him to do what he had done. As for the people of Melos, Caesar thought they had been punished enough by throwing away so much of their money on this false Alexander. Such was the disgraceful end of this bold scheme concerning the false Alexander. When Archelaus had begun his ethnarchy and had come into Judea, he accused Josephus, the son of Boethus, of helping the rebels. He removed him from the high priesthood and appointed Joazar's brother Eleazar in his place. He also rebuilt the royal palace at Jericho in splendid style. He diverted half the water that had usually supplied the village of Nera and led it into the plain, so it could water the palm trees he had planted there. He also built a village, gave it his own name, and called it Archelaus. Archelaus also broke the law of our fathers by marrying Glaphyra, the daughter of Archelaus. She had been the wife of his brother Alexander, and Alexander had had 3 children by her. Among the Jews, marrying a brother's wife was considered detestable. Eleazar did not remain high priest for long either, for while he was still alive, Jesus, the son of Sai, was put in his place. In the 10th year of Archelaus's rule, his brothers, along with the leading men of Judea and Samaria, could no longer endure his savage and tyrannical treatment of them. They accused him before Caesar, especially because they knew he had disobeyed Caesar's orders, which had required him to govern them with moderation. When Caesar heard this, he was very angry. He summoned the steward who managed Archelaus's affairs at Rome, a man also named Archelaus. Since Caesar thought it beneath him to write to Archelaus himself, he ordered the steward to sail away as quickly as possible and bring Archelaus to him. The steward made the voyage in haste. When he arrived in Judea, he found Archelaus feasting with his friends. He told him what Caesar had sent him to do and hurried him away. When Archelaus came to Rome, Caesar listened both to what certain accusers had to say against him and to the answer Archelaus could make. Then Caesar banished him, assigned Vienna, a city of Gaul, as the place where he was to live, and took his money from him. Poor Archelaus went up to Rome because of this summons. He told his friends about a dream. He had seen 10 ears of corn, full of wheat and perfectly ripe, and it seemed to him that oxen devoured them. When he woke and got up, the vision seemed very important to him, so he sent for the diviners who studied dreams. Their interpretations differed, and they did not all agree. Then Simon, a man of the sect of the Essenes, asked permission to speak freely. He said the vision meant a change in Archelaus's affairs, and not a change for the better. The oxen, because they endure hard labor, signified afflictions. They also signified a change of condition, because land that oxen plow cannot remain as it was before. The 10 ears of corn marked the same number of years, because an ear of corn grows in a single year. Therefore, he said, the time of Archelaus's government was finished. This was how Simon explained the dream. On the 5th day after Archelaus first had the dream, the other Archelaus, the man Caesar had sent to Judea to summon him away, arrived there. A similar thing happened to Glaphyra, Archelaus's wife. She was the daughter of King Archelaus, and as I said before, had first been married as a virgin to Alexander, the son of Herod and brother of Archelaus. But Alexander was killed by his father, and afterward she married Juba, the king of Libya. When Juba died, she lived as a widow in Cappadocia with her father. Then Archelaus divorced his former wife Mariamne and married Glaphyra, so strong was his affection for her. During her marriage to him, she had this dream. She thought she saw Alexander standing beside her. She rejoiced and embraced him with great affection, but he complained against her. "O Glaphyra, you prove true the saying that women cannot be trusted. Did you not pledge your faith to me? Were you not married to me when you were a virgin? Did we not have children together? Yet because you desired a second husband, you forgot the affection I bore you. Nor were you satisfied with that wrong against me. You were bold enough to obtain a third husband to lie with you, and in an indecent and reckless way you entered my own house and married Archelaus, your husband and my brother. Even so, I will not forget the former kindness you showed me. I will free you from every such shameful action and make you mine again as you once were." After Glaphyra told this dream to her female companions, she died within a few days. I did not think these accounts were out of place in the present narrative, both because I am now speaking about kings, and because they may be useful for confirming the immortality of the soul and the providence of God over human affairs. For that reason, I thought them worth recording. But if anyone does not believe such stories, let him keep his own opinion, and let him not prevent another person from drawing encouragement toward virtue from them. Archelaus's country was then added to the province of Syria. Cyrenius, a man who had been consul, was sent by Caesar to make an account of people's property in Syria and to sell the household goods of Archelaus.
And the book 17 ends with the house of Herod broken into pieces small enough for Rome to hold in one hand, and a Roman senator named Cyrenius riding down into Judea to do the coldest, most ordinary thing an empire does, to take account, to number the people, to value the house of Archelaus and sell it. Josephus sets it down as an administrative footnote, the sort of thing that closes a book about kings. But hold that word a taxing, a census, a whole country called to be enrolled by the decree of Caesar Augustus. For a little while ago, in the last black years of the Herod we have just buried, in a town called Bethlehem, a child was born who had no part in any of this bloodshed, and who will outlast every crown in it. Josephus does not tell that story. But he has just told us, better than any friend of the family ever could, exactly what the world was like on the night it began. Thank you for sitting with the whole of Book 17. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly. One last thing before you go. There is a part on our stage still wanting a voice, and it may as well be yours. Come and read for us at footnotesandfolly.click, and be in the next telling rather than only watching it. And before the lamp goes out, a small request. If something tonight taught you, or surprised you, or simply delighted you, do leave a comment and tell me what it was. And if there is a work, an author, or a tale you should like me to take up next, set it down there as well. I read every one, and many an episode has begun its life as a viewer suggestion. Until next time.